Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery is a Valentine's Day special. In honor of the day, I posted a poll on YouTube and the majority chose the partner pair of Regna the Redeemer and Krav the Unredeemed. So this episode is for you. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You could find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. Patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description too. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Regna is a 4/4 angel with flying for 5 generic and 1 white. She has a triggered ability where you create 2 1/1 warrior tokens at the end of each turn in which your team gained life. She also partners with Krav, which is why they can share the command zone. Krav is a 3/3 demon for 4 generic and 1 black. When you pay 1 black and sacrifice X creatures, target player draws X cards and gains X life, and Krav gets X +1/+1 counters on him. At first glance, these creatures might seem overcosted for what they do, but they are a combo in the command zone. They work together because whenever Krav gains you life, Regna creates creature tokens which can then be sacrificed to Krav in order to create more creature tokens at the end of the turn. It's important to know that if you gain life at the beginning of an end step, Regna won't trigger it because the end step already triggered. This deck aims to further augment their synergy by including ways of creating more tokens as well as ways to sacrifice them for value. Fortunately, this color combination allows us to include plenty of cards that work well on their own or cards that are practically an engine on their own. So let's break it down into simple parts, and first let's see how we can provide Krav more bodies to sacrifice. Andrexar Master Breeder creates Thrall tokens whenever we cast a creature. This is a good way to take advantage of how expensive our commanders are to cast. Unfortunately, if there are 7 or more Thralls on the battlefield, we have to sacrifice Andrexar. However, if we're constantly sacrificing those Thralls, then it shouldn't be a problem. I can even go a step further. The deck includes Divine Visitation, which makes him create angels instead of Thralls. So that stipulation is never met and you'd never have to sacrifice him. However, Divine Visitation isn't just included because of Andrexar. Almost all the tokens created by the deck are weenies. Divine Visitation turns them into beefy flyers. As it becomes relevant in the video, I'll mention this enchantment often. Ghoulcaller Gissa is one of those cards that serve 2 functions in one in the deck. First of all, her activated ability requires sacrificing a creature, which triggers a bunch of cards in the deck, which we'll see soon enough. Now, when she does sacrifice a creature, she creates an amount of zombie tokens equal to the power of the sacrificed creature. This ability is amazing in the deck. With the previously mentioned Divine Visitation, you can sacrifice an angel token to Gissa in order to create 4 more 4/4 flying angel creature tokens. Not only that, but she has the potential to create a bunch of tokens that can then be sacrificed to other sacrifice outlets in the deck for even more value. Other ways of creating incredible amounts of creature tokens is making them X at a time. Secure the Wastes and White Sun Zenith are both mana sinks where you create a ton of tokens at instant speed. When done at the end of the turn before yours, you can have quite the squadron to send towards an opponent and then sacrifice for value later. As a bonus, White Sun Zenith gets shuffled back into your deck afterwards. You can also use Decree of Justice to create X tokens at instant speed, but only if you cycle it. If you're going to use it to create X angel tokens, it's limited to sorcery speed. Finale of Glory also creates X creature tokens at sorcery speed. However, if you sink 12 or more mana into it, you create twice as many creatures. Speaking of creating twice as many creatures, the deck is also running Anointed Procession. This enchantment doubles the amount of creature tokens created. Since the deck is constantly creating creature tokens, this enchantment really speeds up our engines and our board state. It might attract a lot of hate and attention, so try and cast it the turn before you take full advantage of it. Stormherd is another spell with the potential of making things crazy. It might cost 10 mana to cast, but it creates an amount of flyers equal to your life total. This deck is constantly gaining life. Even if you're at only 20 life, you just created 20 1/1 flyers for just 10 mana. If you're above 40 life, then it's just ridiculous. Requiem Angel and Teza Orzhov Scion both create tokens when creatures you control die. What's great about these effects is that they don't care about the token dying. This means that it is possible to go infinite with Requiem Angel and Divine Visitation. Recall that Divine Visitation makes your token angels instead. So Requiem Angel won't be making 1/1 spirits when a creature you control dies, but a 4/4 angel instead. So you can sacrifice that angel to an effect and it'll replace itself for free. Even combining this with something like Teza's ability means that you can essentially exile as many creatures as you want. Teza can make tokens whenever your creatures die, but they have to be black. So you can't really go infinite with Divine Visitation. It'd have to be something like Darkest Hour. Darkest Hour is not included in the deck because it doesn't really do anything else except go infinite with Teza. but there's other ways of going infinite in the deck, so it's not really needed. Similar to Gisa, Elenda the Dusk Rose is another card that can do multiple things in the deck. Whenever another creature dies, notice how it's not restricted to just your creatures, you put a +1/+1 counter on her. Then when she dies, you create as many white vampire tokens with lifelink as Elendra's power. So not only can you go tall with Elenda, but if she dies, or if you sacrifice her to anything, you can make a considerable amount of tokens. Since these tokens have lifelink, they also synergize with Regna, so value abound. This even pairs well with Martial Coup. Martial Coup might be a board wipe, and we'll discuss the responses in the deck later on, but it's also a way to put tokens on the battlefield after wiping it. So if you're killing off Elenda with it, the amount of tokens you can get afterwards is ridiculous. Westfield Abbey is the slowest token creator in the deck, but it still creates tokens. You have to pay 5 mana and life each time as well as tap it. But if you activate it while sacrificing 5 creatures, it transforms into Ormendal Profane Prince, a 9/7 flying indestructible demon with lifelink and haste. Including a non-mana fixing land in this deck is not a big deal since it's a 2-colored deck. Also, Ormendal is a great creature in the deck since he also has lifelink, which pairs well with Regna. Being a 9/7 flying indestructible beater is nothing to scoff at either. It's very easy to get Ormendal online fairly quickly. Another creature that takes advantage of all the tokens and the synergy of the deck is Teysa Karlov. She gives vigilance and lifelink to all of our tokens. This makes us able to swing in with our army and then use them as blockers, while potentially gaining a ton of life in the process. Gaining life each turn due to our tokens dealing damage in combat means triggering Regna each turn. Teysa also doubles the triggers that occur whenever one of our creatures die. This alone can really close out games quicker thanks to all the sacrifice engines in the deck. And this is one of the main reasons the deck wants to create so many tokens, because they also function as fodder for the many sacrifice engines in the deck. Yet, not only does this deck care about when they die, but when they enter the battlefield also. So naturally the deck's running Daxos Blessed by the Sun. He triggers whenever a creature we control dies or enters the battlefield. This is essentially doubling the life gained per body we put onto the battlefield. We also gain life when our creatures die thanks to Zulaport Cutthroat and Cruel Celebrant. What's great about this life gain is that it's at the expense of our opponents, which is one main route to victory in the deck. We also use our creature tokens, whether death or creation, to hurt our opponents. Sir Conrad the Grim also triggers whenever another creature dies. We might not get life like the previous 2 creatures, but we can deal a significant amount of damage to our opponents. Corpse Knight can also deal a significant amount of damage to our opponents, but only when creatures enter the battlefield under our control, not when they die. We can also weaponize that life gain or benefit of the damage dealt with Sanguine Blonde or Exquisite Blood. The former harms our opponents whenever we gain life, and the latter gains us life whenever opponents are dealt damage. Also, both these enchantments on the battlefield feedback off of each other, generating an infinite loop. Whenever each is triggered, it triggers the other one upon resolution. For example, if you gain life, Sanguine Bond triggers, making each opponent lose life. That in turn triggers Exquisite Blood, gaining us life. Then it starts all over again. This will win up the game on the spot unless an opponent responds to it. Other key ways of taking advantage of creatures dying is card draw. Dark Prophecy and Liliana Dreadhorde General trigger whenever our creatures die, regardless of how, while Smothering Abomination only triggers if the creature is sacrificed. In the majority of the cases, it makes no difference since most of the time our creatures are dying because we're sacrificing them to our own abilities. Speaking of which, Erebos Bleak-Hearted, Yawgmoth Thran Physician, and Resaketh the Foul-Blooded provide sacrifice outlets that are exceedingly useful. Erebos might be the only one of these 3 requiring mana to activate, but at least his triggered ability only costs 2 life to use. Razaketh goes beyond simply drawing us a card since we can just straight up tutor for any card with him. He might cost a whopping 8 mana to cast, but this deck generates mana advantage fairly easily. And even then, Razaketh is an 8/8 flyer with trample, so his mana cost is justified as far as his keywords and power toughness go. We can also draw cards thanks to Skull Clamp. When equipped to a creature with a toughness of 1, we don't have any hassle with drawing the cards. However, if the creature won't die when it's equipped, we could just sacrifice it later for value and still draw the 2 cards off of Skull Clamp's trigger. Not wanting to only depend on creature-based draw, the deck is running Necropotence. Gaining so much life means that we have the luxury of turning that life into card advantage. Since we're not really drawing the cards, we can bypass effects that prevent us from drawing cards like Narset Parts or Veils, as well as not triggering cards like Smothering Tithe. Unfortunately, discarding cards means exiling them, so the deck is running Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel to prevent that from happening. Either way, these cards work well on their own since they're not only included solely for Necropotent. Now that I mention it, Bolas' Citadel is another way to turn life into cards, although in this case we're just straight up paying life to cast cards off the top of our library. Having both Necropotence and the Citadel in play is amazing since we can exile lands with Necropotence and then cast spells with the Citadel. If it's something we don't need to cast at that moment, we could just exile it with Necropotence and get it into our hands at the end of our turn. Although the deck is black, I'm only running one tutor, and that's Vampiric Tutor. The deck does fairly well in drawing cards from our library, plus it also has Razaketh. However, in case of emergencies, having a sole instant speed tutor in the deck isn't superfluous. We can also manipulate the top of our library in order to improve the quality of our draws with Viscera Seer. This is possibly one of the best sacrifice outlets in the deck because the ability is completely free and the card itself costs just 1 black mana. It's incredibly powerful here since we can just use it as sacrifice enabler even if we're already satisfied with the top card of our library. Earlier I mentioned responses, and the deck does synergize in that aspect as well. I already mentioned Yawgmoth as a way to draw cards, but Yawgmoth can also get rid of creatures by giving them -1/-1 when we do. But we can also get rid of creatures with our stacks pieces. And if you've seen enough of my videos, you can probably already imagine which one those are: Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact. These cards are just amazing in token decks that run black, especially in Aristocrats decks like this one where we're constantly sacrificing tokens. These very easily clear the battlefield of creatures. Since we have 2 commanders, we can send commander damage to 2 different players at once, since Regna and Krav have to each give 21 damage, so it's even more beneficial for this deck. The deck can also take care of other types of permanents besides creatures. Other End, Anguished Unmaking, and Vindicate can get rid of any non-land permanent, although Vindicate can only do so at sorcery speed, but at least it can get rid of lands. Even so, these are cheap ways of dealing with anything on the board that needs removing. The Spark can also get rid of anything at instant speed, but only if its casting cost is 4 or higher, which is fine because in a commander game, most significant threats will more than likely cost 4 or more mana. As mentioned earlier, the deck's also running a couple of Wraths like Wrath of God, Damnation, the previously mentioned Martial Coup, and Hour of Revelation. Hour of Revelation can get rid of everything, and more often than not, it will just cost 3 white mana to cast. Even though we have the capabilities of creating a bunch of creature tokens, sometimes it's necessary to wipe the board in case opponents need to be set back to 0. At least if we lose our own things, we can still benefit from all of the triggers. Mentioning benefits, the deck also has preventative effects as well as the previously mentioned proactive effects. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots can protect a creature from targeted effects as well as giving haste. We don't have to always protect our creatures, but our commanders cost a lot, so it's important to protect them. A well-timed Teferi's Protection is also clutch. What's great about Teferi's Protection is that our tokens phase out as well, so if anyone overloads a Cyclonic Rift, we're able to keep our tokens as well as our current board state for when it all phases back in later on. And even if we do lose some creatures, we can reanimate them with Whisper Blood Liturgist. Another card that can do multiple things almost at once, Whisper also serves as a sacrifice outlet with the benefit of reanimating a creature, so he's definitely amazing in the deck. We can also take advantage of these sacrifice effects and death triggers to accelerate our mana and get ahead in mana advantage over our opponents. Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar let us sacrifice tokens for mana. Combined with engines that create infinite tokens means that we're able to produce infinite mana. They're also free sacrifice outlets even if we don't need the mana. Pitiless Plunderer and Black Market are similar effects but don't have a built-in sacrifice outlet. The Pirate turns creatures that die into treasure tokens, which is basically a Phyrexian Altar with extra steps, but not too difficult to pull off in this particular deck. Black Market is only limited to black mana, but that's half the deck. Also, it's cumulative. Not only that, but it's not just limited to creatures we control. Any creature that dies triggers it, so if it sticks around, we get a ton of black mana at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase. Burnished Heart is a great ramp effect on its own, but it's just cheeky in this deck since it does so by sacrificing itself, meaning even that synergizes with all the engines and effects in the deck. Land tax also helps us get lands, but they do go to our hand instead of the battlefield. We're not too limited with what we can do as far as mana acceleration is concerned, but adding land tax is phenomenal, especially in a format where green decks can ramp so hard. Sword of the Animus is another ramp effect in the deck. This one does put a land onto the battlefield, but we have to attack in order to trigger it. That isn't a problem since we're always going to have at least one token to attack with, or if it attached to a beefy creature, it will survive combat in order to continue carrying the sword for more ramp later on. We also have access to Smothering Tithe, so it's also included in the deck. Drawing is important to every commander deck, so being able to tax opponents for drawing into a bunch of cards is great. Even if they do pay the tax whenever they draw their only card per turn, they're still being delayed compared to us, so it's a win-win. The deck also runs conventional methods of adding mana to your mana pool like Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Mox Diamond, Arcane Signet, Orzhov Signet, Talisman of Hierarchy, and the previously mentioned Thought Vessel. These are your standard mana rocks, but they are incredibly helpful for getting those commanders out ahead of curve while also providing mana to boost our X spells. Cabal Coffers and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth are also included to be able to generate a ton of mana. Since the deck is two-colored, it does have enough swamps so that Cabal Coffers can at least do something significant even without Urborg in play. Speaking of which, the rest of the deck are the lands: Scrubland, Godless Shrine, Isolated Chapel, Caves of Koilos, Silent Clearing, Command Tower, Ancient Tomb, and Temple of the False God. It's also running all 8 fetch lands as well as 9 of each basic land. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Regna and Krav. These commanders make running a death for value deck all the more smoother due to how they synergize with themselves. As mentioned in the beginning of the video, you pretty much have a nice combo in the command zone. The rest of the deck is just synergizing with what they do, but taking it up a notch with the many engines the deck has, as well as single cards that have multiple synergistic functions all on their own. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. I also want to thank those who participated in the poll. This episode was a product of your input, so I'm glad it came to be. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, happy brewing and happy Valentine's Day.